What lies beneath shame and entrepreneurship? That is the topic for today's episode. I want to have a little bimble down the path of shame. It is something that is so misunderstood and impacts so greatly on everyone in all walks of life. So it's something that I wanted to tackle early on in my podcast, and today feels like a good day to do that. So I guess the first thing to tackle is what is shame? And I'm going to call on some experts to help me out with this one. So the first is Brené Brown. She talks about shame a lot in her book, Daring Greatly. So I figured I would just read you what she has to say about shame. So what is shame and why is it so hard to talk about? And she goes on to say, if you're pretty sure that shame doesn't apply to you, keep reading and I'll clear that up. Okay. So she says, I start every talk, article, and chapter on shame with the same 1, 2, 3s, or the first 3 things that you need to know about shame. So you'll keep listening. Number 1, we all have it. Shame is universal and one of the most primitive human emotions that we experience. The only people who don't experience shame lack the capacity for empathy and human connection. Here's your choice. Fess up to experiencing shame or admit that you're a sociopath. Number 2, we're all afraid to talk about shame. Number 3, the less we talk about shame, the more control it has over our lives. Okay, and she goes on to say, there are a couple of very helpful ways to think about shame. First, shame is the fear of disconnection. We are psychologically, emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually hardwired for connection, love, and belonging. Connection, along with love and belonging, two expressions of connection, is why we are here, and it is what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Shame is the fear of disconnection. It's the fear that something we've done or failed to do, an ideal that we've not lived up to, or a goal that we've not accomplished, makes us unworthy of connection. I'm not worthy or good enough for love, belonging, or connection. I'm unlovable. I don't belong. Here's the definition of shame that emerged from my research. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Okay, so that's what Brené had to say. Now, I actually did I think it was a 6-week course all about shame about a year ago now with an absolutely amazing man, David Bedrick, and a coach, Simone Soul. And I have to say, doing this program was kind of pivotal for me. The stuff that I learned about shame really helped me to turn things around in my own entrepreneurial journey. And I'm just going to read you something that David wrote about shame. Um, so he says, how does shame become the basis for how one relates to the world and to oneself? 3 important things are required. First, the shamed person does not trust themselves. At some point, someone said or implied something is wrong with you. That's the message that gets recorded into someone's consciousness when they are shamed. Because they believe something's wrong with them, their tendency is to not look inside for what's right about themselves, not look inside for what's right for them, not be attuned to their own feelings, insights, or their own intelligence. Instead, they look outside. The attitude of the shamed person is, somebody tell me what's right. Something's obviously wrong with me, so whatever I generate always feels unreliable. And this was absolutely huge for me, along with the knowledge or the learning that society tends to pathologize everything. Okay. So, first of all, we are conditioned into having this very generalized, boxed in sense of what's normal. Okay. And if you fall outside of what's considered to be normal, it doesn't make you different, it makes you wrong. Okay, because we're pathologizing everything. So let's take ADHD for an example. That is labeled as a disorder. It is, you have neurotypical, i.e. normal, and neurodivergent, right? And it's a very good example of how we pathologize things into right and wrong. The other thing that happens to us is from a really young age, we get taught not to trust ourselves. So, things like stop crying, there's nothing to be scared of. Or having adults minimize our feelings. So, don't be so silly. You're overreacting, that kind of thing. And what that does is it drums into us on repeat that we can't trust ourselves. So, and this happens to everyone, we're all walking around with this stuff. But what it does, and to a greater or lesser degree from person to person, is it teaches you to look outside of yourself for answers rather than within. We're all born with this amazing gift of intuition, and most of us are deeply unconnected to it. So, how does this in fact, no, before I go there, I'm going to talk about my own journey with shame and how unlocking and understanding shame helped me it changed everything actually for me. Excuse me. So I have a disorder called trichotillomania, which is a hair pulling disorder. It started when I was 12. I don't know what caused it in me. It's a comorbidity of ADHD, but also trauma. It can be a sensory thing. I also personally think that hormones play a huge part in a number of women's health problems. So who knows? Because obviously as a preteen, I would have had lots of hormones raging. So I don't know what caused it, but it's a disorder that's not really that well understood. And it's also one of those ones that sort of once you have it, you have it. So you know how some people call themselves an alcoholic for life, even though they perhaps have been sober for 35 years or something. Anorexics are generally considered to be anorexic for life. This, I would say, I'm not an expert, I'm not a medic, but I would say this is one of those disorders that falls into the lifelong category. I haven't come across anyone in the media and any articles that's kind of kicked it for good, but again, it's not something that's very well documented, so who knows. Anyway, this began for me at the age of 12, and of course I carried a huge amount of shame about this disorder because what is more normal than having a full head of hair? That is the norm. What is more abnormal than having freaking massive bald patches? And I pulled from the very top of my head, the crown of my head. There was no hiding it, except, I did hide it because I lived in beanie hats, baseball caps, bandanas, anything that would cover my hair, which again is kind of weird, right? It's not normal. Okay, it's noticeable. And this disorder made me feel like a freak. It made me feel different. It made me very ashamed. It made me kind of hate myself. Why was I so different? Why was I such a freak? Why was I doing this to myself? Those kind of thoughts. And it really affected the way I developed through my teens, the woman that I became. Now, who knows? I may have always been somewhat of a tomboy. I don't know. But I sort of felt that I couldn't really be that into makeup and dressing up and that kind of thing because my entire look had to revolve around my headgear. It had to revolve around a hat. And it was way easier for me to pull off the kind of moody emo look than it would have been for me to pull off, the Instagram chic kind of vibe, right? Because like I said before, there was no hiding what I was doing to my hair. I mean, wigs perhaps they never even crossed my radar. I don't really know how good they were back then in the 90s. I've no idea. But like I say, they never even crossed my mind, to be honest. But you certainly couldn't use something like hair extensions or fancy hairdos because there was just nothing up top, you know. Think of like a monk do. That was what I was sporting. And so I kind of became this very angry, moody teenager because I had all these big feelings inside, all this hatred, all this shame. And you know, I was stomping about in Nirvana t-shirts and Doc Martens and beanie hats and dyeing the hair that I did have 15 million colors and getting in trouble at school and what have you. And it all stemmed from this one place. And what happened as I became an adult was this disorder spilled out into addictions. Now, again, addiction is a comorbidity of ADHD. When you go into trichotillomania groups and you speak to people there, lots of them have ADHD diagnosed and lots of them battle with addiction. So these things are all kind of interwoven. But that kind of, I'm going to call it dopamine hunting because this is what hair pulling does. When you pull the hairs, it releases dopamine. So this spilled over for me then into problem drinking, smoking, and just general impulse control issues. And there was this real attitude of, I don't care. What's the point in caring? My life's already so shit. What's the point? Like, I really had that attitude. And, you know, some people will call that just rebellion. But for me, I was just very broken. I was very damaged inside. And trichotillomania is awful for the people around you. They don't know how to help you. They don't know how to stop you because they don't want to shame you and embarrass you. So it's really difficult for your family. And of course, you're really aware of that too. And you have this feeling of letting people down. And there's a lot of secrecy, as there always is with any of these types of disorders, hiding what you're doing from people, lying. You know, it's kind of exhausting. It's really exhausting. So in my early 20s, I don't want to go on for too long about my own sob story, but in my early 20s, my mum found a clinic in London that would begin to revolutionize my trichotillomania journey. And that is because they had developed this system. The clinic, by the way, is called Lucinda Ellery, and it still exists today, as far as I'm aware. They had developed this system where they kind of put a mesh over the area of your hair that was kind of bald or thin, and they would pull through the hairs that you did have with, I don't know, tweezers or something, I forget now. And then they would attach like a false parting and hair extensions, and basically you would walk out of there with hair. It was absolutely amazing. But what it also did was it broke the habit because you physically could not get to the hair because there was this mesh thing in the way. So your own hair would grow back underneath. I mean, it's an absolutely fabulous thing. And I hope it's more accessible for people than it was back then. It was very expensive. And so this really helped me begin to break the habit. And like I say, that was when I was at university. And so really from that time, I've mostly not been pulling my hair, and what will happen is something very stressful will happen and I'll have a big relapse. That's how it tends to go. So it's been more cyclical since my early 20s rather than the constant that it was through my teens. So like I say, I sort of started having problems with my drinking. I was smoking heavily. I just seemed to be someone that had no impulse control at all. And so this shame work helped me to look underneath the behaviors for the message, because this is what David Bedrick taught me. The source of your shame tends to be your greatest gift, but you just have to look underneath for the message. Your body is this amazing messenger, and we tend to be very tuned out to it because of, the way we're raised as children and that sort of thing. We're not very good at listening. So I had 3 things happen all at once. The first was that I separated from my husband. I was totally unprepared for how hard that would hit me emotionally. I think I referred to this in my last podcast. I kind of fell on my arse with that. It was like somebody pulled the rug from under me, because all of a sudden, all the anger that I'd suppressed over 12 years just flew up to the surface. It was like a manhole cover getting, like some kind of burst pipe under the ground, blowing off a manhole cover. And I had this awful ranting monologue going 10 to the dozen, round and round and round and round, 24/7. It was awful. It was making me so anxious and so depressed. And this was the period when I actually feared for my life. I was really not in a good place, and it was this anger that needed to come out over how I was treated. So that was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was I found this shame work, and also read a book by Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now, which is a mindfulness book. And the other thing that happened was I started to have time alone, which I hadn't had for many years. So the children were going sporadically to spend time with their father. We weren't really in a routine with it, but they would go on the odd weekend and have one night there, and I'd be left alone. Now, I'd just come out of 12 years in a relationship where I was never alone because I wasn't allowed to be. And I did not know what to do with myself at all. And so what happened, now I can't remember if at the time of the separation I was drinking or not drinking. I don't know. I've been on and off the wagon a bit since 2018. So I've got my timelines a bit blurred, but needless to say, I had a huge relapse with my hair pulling. I pulled my hair like almost completely bald at the top, and I really hated myself for it. I was drinking again. I was smoking heavily. I was emotional eating. So the children would go off to see their dad, and I would go to the shop and spend loads of money on crisps, chocolates, sweets, cream puddings, loads of that sort of junky stuff. I would make myself something that I like to eat that the kids don't like, so perhaps something spicy. And I'd serve myself up a huge portion, like enough for kind of 4 people, a whole wok full of stir fry. The whole lot would go onto my plate, and it would be kind of spilling over the edges, and I would eat it all. So I was really kind of eating my emotions. And I would think, oh, great, I'll watch some Netflix. And what I noticed was that I was stopping this damn show every 5 or 10 minutes to eat or to pour a drink or to go out for a cigarette. Like, I had ants in my pants. I just kept getting up and down, up and down, up and down. And it was really quite absurd. So I just kind of noticed this with curiosity, and I decided that I was going to just observe myself rather than stop it or shame it or anything like that. So I just observed with playful curiosity. And what I realized was, hot damn, I don't want to sit on my own with my own thoughts. That's what's going on here. And that's what's gone on my whole life. I have distracted myself my whole life by pulling my hair out or getting drunk, or, all these things are just distractions from my own thoughts. And what I also noticed I was doing was shaming the way I was spending my child-free time. I became acutely aware of this, that there was this angry inner bitch going non-stop in my ear. Look at you. Look what you're doing. Look at the state of you. Sitting out here drinking. You should be making the most of this time. You should be going out meeting people. You should be taking this opportunity to do the housework. You should be taking this opportunity to catch up with your work. You should be taking this opportunity to go and do some exercise. You should. Shame, 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 shame. It was awful. It was just non-stop. And I think, the thing is, as women particularly, we're kind of conditioned to be not very good at relaxing. Relaxing is something that we checkbox. It's something that we put on our to-do list, because we are really busy. We're looking after people generally. I mean, I don't know how good single women with no commitments are at relaxing, because I really haven't ever been one. But, most women who are partnered, who are mothers, are doing lots. They're maybe working, they're raising children, they're caring for their family, they're cooking, they're cleaning, all this stuff. And what tends to happen is when the rest of the family will say, get down from the table after a meal and go to relax, the mum will use that time to clear away, to wash up, to catch up on some laundry, etc., etc. So women tend to be on the go quite a lot, and relaxing becomes this thing that we just add to our to-do list. And it's like, oh, did I sit down and watch EastEnders today? Yes, I did. Check. It's not something that we know how to do properly, because relaxing is something that you be rather than do, if that makes sense. So again, there's some conditioning there, and then part of it is numbing and distracting. So all of this stuff was happening in tandem. So I needed to get sober, and getting sober and going through that process, it's quite difficult. And it gives you some courage, I guess, and confidence when you crack it. And also it gives you clarity when you're not pickling yourself every night, right? So I went through that process. I'm really learning to look underneath my behavior for the deeper message was very pivotal for me. And the mindfulness, I think, is huge too, because if you don't practice thinking, then thinking happens to you. So I call this your brain is braining on you, because brains will just run unchecked, right? 90% of the thoughts that you had today are exactly the same as the ones you had yesterday, or exactly the same as the ones you'll have tomorrow, because your brain is just running on this pre-programmed loop, right? And so if you don't check it, if you don't learn to observe what's going on, you fall into these negative thought loops, and then that's when you start turning to this dopamine hunting behavior, right? So you have to start training your brain to work on your behalf, okay? Because like I say, it's a series of pathways that have been written over the course of your life, and every thought, every feeling is a pathway. And what we want to do is rewrite those pathways. And the steps to doing that really are to get really good at observing what you're thinking and feeling, and not to distract and turn away and bury and gaslight yourself. You need to feel your feelings, and you need to acknowledge your feelings, right? So we don't want this toxic positivity bullshit, gaslighting yourself and that sort of thing. If you've fucked off, then, observe it, acknowledge it, and then move on. And I love to laugh at my brain braining. I'll be like, whoop, there she goes again, my inner bitch, right? I think laughter is really good at pulling you out of, a slump. So, we want to intentionally rewrite those pathways, and mindfulness is a really big way of doing that. Again, I'm not an expert. Go buy a book. The one that I read was The Power of Now. But just finding ways to keep bringing yourself back to the now, not letting your mind run away into the future or get stuck in the path on those loops. Noticing where you're overthinking, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that you want to nip in the bud. Is there anything else I wanted to say about pathways? I don't think so. I've lost my train of thought, guys. I do this quite a lot. So how does shame weave into entrepreneurship? Well, so the first part of this podcast episode, all the stuff that I've talked about, imagine carrying all of that on your shoulders and then trying to go out and persuade people to buy from you. When you think that you're not worthy, you're not good enough, you're unlovable. Not easy, okay? And people are notoriously bad at selling themselves. That is why all of those things that you see online, like learn how to make 10K a month in my 3-step program, or learn how to make 5K a month in 6 weeks, blah, blah, blah. That kind of stuff sells so well because the reality is most people are really, really bad at selling themselves. They don't know what the point is of their work. They don't know what they're promising. They don't know how to differentiate themselves. They don't know how to stand out and sound memorable. They end up rambling on about themselves too much, rather like I've done in this podcast episode. And, they sound wobbly because they have no idea that they are a rock star and a badass. They have no self-belief, no self-worth. So they shuffle out onto the stage. They look down at the floor and they kind of mumble, oh, I've got this thing. Please, do you want to buy it from me? Please. And they don't really know how to tell you why you should, because they've got no self-belief, right? That is how shame is impacting entrepreneurship. The other thing that happens is entrepreneurship requires a lot of pivoting. It's kind of fail. Oh, that worked. Hang on. Let's do that for a bit longer. Oh, that doesn't feel quite aligned. Let's pivot this way. That is the nature of entrepreneurship. And actually a lot of people, this is a bit of a side comment, but a lot of people don't really understand that, and they try to set themselves up as an entrepreneur when really what they want is the stability and security of being an employee. However, you have to be able to pivot and sort of assume these new identities. And if you don't know at the root of it all, whichever outfit you decide to put on today, outfit, identity, whatever, if you don't really realize that underneath all that, you're a rock star, you are worthwhile, you are loved, people should pay you, you're worth paying, all this sort of stuff, then you're going to have one hell of an identity crisis as you go through your business. Because your journey is in constant flux as you evolve. You're constantly thinking on your feet. You're constantly changing direction. It's the only way that you can excel as an entrepreneur. The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, right? So we iterate moving forward all the time in momentum in entrepreneurship. And it's that in itself is quite tiring. That in itself could knock your confidence. It's like having a continuous, never-ending existential crisis, but on purpose, right? And it's kind of normal. So what am I doing today? Does this make sense? Is this in line with my big vision? Is this in line with who I am? What do I want? Like what this is like a daily thing, right? And it is normal. But if underneath all that you're carrying all this shit around with you, all this just becomes a big swamp of messiness, right? So this is how shame is playing into entrepreneurship. And I would highly encourage you to read the books that I've mentioned in this podcast. Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. David Bedrick wrote You Can't Judge a Body by Its Cover. Eckhart Tolle wrote The Power of Now. These books, again, horses for courses, what works for one person won't always work for another, but these books really changed my freaking life. The Power of Now saved my life. I say that all the time. That book saved my life. So I highly encourage you, if you feel like you do have some mindset crud to work through, try those books and see if they help you. Because while you're carrying this around, you're going to be wobbly. You're not going to come across as bold and confident because you're not bold or confident. How do you expect people to buy from you if you don't feel worthy? It's really, really, really important that you get on top of this, because that wobbly energy completely kills sales, and it's what leads to burnout. It is what leads to you throwing shit at the wall, praying that something will stick, doing everything, taking on more and more and more and more and more, and then burning out because you haven't addressed the key issue. So I read a blog, just to finish off with, that I thought was a great idea. And it was about copywriting, but it said that you should assign your words a job. So hire your copy in the same way as you would an employee. Your words, your writing is now under your employee, and their role is to represent your business at its highest potential. They're your knights, your guards. It's what they're there for, to protect your business goals, even from you, right? They do not suffer self-doubt. They are given their orders on behalf of you and your business, and they go out there and execute. So it's just kind of like thinking, having that kind of sense of removal and distance and non-attachment between what you're writing and who you believe you are at the core. I felt like this was quite a good way of starting while you work on this stuff, just to give your copy the job of protecting your business interests. And also having, and this is something that I talk about a lot with personal brands, you don't need to just have kind of one box that you fit yourself into. You don't need to just have one landing page. You don't have to try and fit yourself into one tiny little Instagram bio. Play with this stuff. Play with bringing your personality out. The more you bring your personality forward, the more scope there will be to sell lots of different things under your brand, to be able to talk about shame in one program, branding in another program, money in another program, manifestation in another program. Because if you're bringing your full personality out, it will make sense. If it makes sense to you, it will make sense to your people. And sometimes cramming yourself into a box because it's what you think you should do just compounds the shame and the lack of self-worth that you already feel. Because why doesn't this feel right to me? I must be broken. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. This was a bit of a ramble straight from the heart. Again, not scripted. I don't know whether this is going to be a good move moving forward for me or not, but I really hope that you got some useful stuff out of this. And I hope that it raised awareness a little bit about trichotillomania. And I think that's it. Yeah. Other than that, just keep going. You rock.